Hey, folks. Welcome to the Ben and Shaun podcast. What are we calling it, Shaun?
It's a working title.
So, behind the scenes, Shaun and I have been talking about doing a podcast for a little while, and we've been talking to some other people as well. We've got a bit of a crew together. But it's not really happened so far, and the main reason is because we just can't agree on a name. We've been putting names to one another, like, "Hey, how about this?" We did put some stuff out, but for the most part, just nobody's been putting any names forward. So now is the time just to do the podcast. We've decided, and so for those of you who don't know, I'm Ben, also known as Battle Mode, and I'm a YouTuber. I was on the Explorminate podcast for quite a long time, which is where I met Shaun, and a member of the Explorminate community. So I've focused very heavily on 4X games, but I play all kinds of things. And so the focus of this podcast is going to be, it's not going to be focused just on strategy games. It's going to be just all gaming. Okay, so whatever we want to talk about. Shaun, introduce yourself.
Hey, I'm Shaun. I'm also sort of not really kind of a YouTuber. I do have a channel and all that kind of thing. I just haven't really been able to do much with it. Yeah, also from the Explorminate podcast, as you mentioned, and I'm more of a general strategy game player, I guess, but I sort of play bits of everything. And that's why we've started up this podcast, because it's not focused into one specific niche. Like, it's just generally whatever we're doing, whatever we want to talk about, like a general gaming kind of thing, gives us more freedom, which I'm very much looking forward to.
Because I think, towards the end of the Explorminate thing, both of us were kind of struggling with modern, with 4X games a little bit. Like, I haven't actually played many strategy games for a while. The first strategy game that I've played in months, we're going to talk about shortly. But so other than that, I've just been playing mostly like arcade games and fighting games, and beat 'em ups and stuff like that. And and shoot 'em ups. So I've really kind of like fallen off strategy gaming recently, and not through any fault of anybody's. I think I'm just kind of burned out, and obviously I do it as a job. So I work as a contractor for a games developer. So I kind of work with strategy games in the daytime. So I kind of want to just play different things when I'm not at work.
I think more or less the same, not because I do it as a job, but these days I don't really have as much time as I used to play things like complex 4X kind of games, because I work 6 days a week. I'm a truck driver, and if I sit down, I try to get into some of these games and I just sort of switch off. I just want something, where I can just turn my brain off and have some fun. So I've never been a huge 4X strategy player in the first place. Like, I'm into more of the tactics game side of things. But yeah, generally I've also found myself moving away from more complex, well, not even really complex sort of games, like from strategy games to more action-oriented games. And I've been very much enjoying making that switch, because it's not even like, brain dead games kind of thing. It's just fun and it's something different. So more or less the same as you.
I think it's interesting as well, because I noticed, and I didn't make this switch, as a conscious thing. I wasn't like, oh, I don't want to play this kind of game anymore, I'm going to play something else. I just kind of naturally gravitated over to something that was shorter to play, where the gameplay comes thick and fast. There's no kind of waiting around. There's not this 2 hour, 3 hour period at the start of a game where it's kind of boring and slow and easy. I'm really turned off by this in modern gaming at the moment. And I've struggled to enjoy modern games, I've got to be honest, because there's a guy I watch on YouTube called The Electric Underground, and he calls it gameplay density, right? And for me, I'm starting to realize a game needs to have really, really high gameplay density. And what that means is, the game has to be engaging right from the start, and it's got to be thick, full of decision-making, excitement, and fun right the way through. When there's slow moments, when there's stuff where, the developers clearly just put padding in, this is getting really bad in strategy games, I feel. And so it's one of the reasons why I've turned off a lot of modern strategy games. It's kind of a problem in general gaming, to be honest. But so it was really interesting for me to go back to playing stuff like fighting games where, I can have a break at work and I can be like, right, I've got like 10 minutes, I need to take a break. And I can turn on, a fighting game like Virtua Fighter or Tekken or something, or Street Fighter, or, something like this. And then play for like, 10 minutes and just get a real exciting time out of it. And, there's some skill that goes in, and then I'm done. Like, I could just put it away and go, oh, well, I'm back to work now. Whereas I think it's a harder sell to pick up like, a really complex game, like sort of Galciv or, Shadow Empire or whatever else, these complex games that I play, and then play just for 10 minutes. because they actually become very, very addictive, and you can kind of get lost in them for hours. And I was wasting a lot of time with those kind of games, actually. Not saying that I don't play them, because I still do. I'm just saying that, I think that I've kind of naturally gravitated towards stuff where it's just less time consuming.
Yeah, I've been finding the transition back to more action-oriented games really exciting as well. Like, I was into more of the turn-based tactics side of things, but then I jumped over and I play something like, say, Space Marine 2. Like, I loaded that up, and it feels like an old Xbox 360 game. That game, like an early Gears of War kind of title. And it was like, you jump in there, you've got cutscene, you jump in, and you're fighting like Tyranids, and you've got your canned executions and like brains exploding and chainswords revving, and I'm like, this is awesome.
Yeah.
Because nowadays I sort of look more towards games that I can jump in and out of, which is something I've been moving towards for a while. And this is pretty much that. Like, okay, you jump in, maybe it takes you half an hour to do a mission, but you're not committed to a 5-hour or 10-hour kind of game. You dip in and out whenever you've got the time. And it's sort of the same with stuff like, say, Helldivers 2 as well. Like, you jump in and you can do your mission for like half an hour if that's all you've got time for before bed, and that's it. And it's just like self-contained fun.
Yeah, I mean, older games kind of did this as well. Like, I mean, I gave the fighting game as an example where, you can play that just for 2-3 minutes and you've done a round. Or think about like a racing game, like the old racing games where you might do, I'll use something like that everybody knows, like Super Mario Kart, or one of the Mario Kart variations. You might do maybe one track and three rounds of the, 3 laps of the track, and then maybe that's organized further into different cups, so you might have like 5 tracks that you play in a row, and that's what, 20 minutes gameplay, 15 minutes of gameplay. And so the game's already kind of portioned out into bite-sized chunks for you, and you can increase those bite-sized chunks, by the, like playing a whole cup or a race or whatever. And I kind of like games that do that a little bit, because definitely one of the big problems I think with modern AAA gaming particularly is that they're moving towards these sort of like really big open world games. And I first noticed it with Witcher 3, although that I was late to the party with this stuff because this has been going on for years now. And Witcher 3 was the first Witcher game I think that was released after I had my big break from gaming, which was between 2007 and about 2014. Okay, so I had about 7 years off. And I noticed that even though the story was cool in Witcher 3, and I enjoyed the combat a little, I found that there was just so much trekking around and just waiting. And like, I'm waiting for the fun. Even though, it might be quite immersive to kind of like ride your horse over this land, most of the gameplay, the actual gameplay in Witcher 3 between missions is just picking crap up off the floor. And I fucking hate crafting systems in games now. So I just don't care about that at all, right? So I noticed it. I was like, there's so much waiting around. I must have played the game for about 20 hours and I got about 5 hours of real gameplay out of it. And I just thought I've wasted 3/4 of my time playing this game. Now, by the way, I'm not saying that A Witcher 3 is a bad game necessarily. And it's certainly not the worst offender for this kind of style of game design. But everything about modern games design now, particularly in AAA games, seems to be about dragging out playtime. And I've seen other critics talk about this quite a lot, and I'm starting to see it. So it's starting to bug me, and it bugs me in strategy games when they add stuff in there that is just slow, padded, kind of filler content. Maybe that's part of the reason why I think as we get older and we get busier, we start moving away from stuff like that.
It's so funny because I actually didn't like The Witcher 3 either. People get mad at me whenever I'm like, yeah, it was all right, but it wasn't that good. Like, it's not bad, but I had the same thing. I jump in, and these guys aren't the only one that do it. Like, Ubisoft does it all the time, and it drives me nuts.
Witcher 3 was amazing compared to Ubisoft games like Assassin's Creed. They are really bad for that.
Well, yeah, because your Witcher 3, like, it looks nice. It had good storytelling from what I remember of the story. But I think I only played it for like 7 or 8 hours, and then I uninstalled it. I just completely lost interest because you're wandering around the open world, and everything you're doing in every zone is the same. Like, destroy a ghoul nest, kill a bunch of dogs, kill a bunch of bandits, get a new piece of armor from this thing, or craft a new piece of armor, or whatever. It's the same thing in every zone. It's just different difficulty levels or something like that. And that was when it fell apart for me. I was just like, no, this isn't it. I can't get into this. It's so repetitive and mind-numbing.
Yeah.
Yeah, and then like Ubisoft is terrible for that as well. Everything is just crazy padded out experience, because Ghost Recon Wildlands was the first, I guess, real open worldy kind of game I played from them. And people, again, they rave about it. And they go, "This is really good," and I go, "This sucks." This is the same thing. It's, you've got your, free some rebels or get some intel on something or whatever. But yeah, it's the same thing over and over again, and they've done that going forward as well. Yeah, I've moved away from that into more distilled down experiences where it's, you just get in and you straight into the gameplay. You do what you want to do and you can just get straight into the fun.
Yeah. Here's a kind of weird outlier, okay? And have you played Metal Gear Solid 5?
No, I haven't played that. I think I've played like 3.
Okay, so Metal Gear Solid 5 was a weird game because it was an open world game, but it's also kind of, you have this helicopter that delivers you to the battlefield in between missions if you want, or you can just play it kind of sequentially and the helicopter comes and drops you off. It's kind of a weird sort of sandbox game with this storyline that goes through it. Metal Gear Solid 5 is a flawed game in many ways. However, I played the shit out of that game and I really enjoyed it, even though it is flawed. Okay. Now, Metal Gear Solid fans will argue, like, a lot of people say it's a bad game. A lot of people say it's a good game. Some people like the story. Like, I liked the story. I thought the story was clever, but it was clearly unfinished. And, other people say they think it's the worst story of the lot. There's all sorts of arguments. But pertinently to this conversation, what was interesting about it was that even though it was an open world game and there wasn't a lot of stuff in the open world unless you mod it, it was interesting because you could play it in this kind of bite-sized way because of the way that the game organized the missions. So you go, okay, I want to go and play that kind of mission now. And so you go in and it does the mission. And once you've completed the story missions, you can redo them. Or you can do these kind of like sort of like randomized missions, although they're not really randomized. They just go through this big list of kind of potential missions. I found that quite compelling. I don't know if I'd go back to it now necessarily, but it's just an interesting way of looking at open world games because I think they all have this problem where, like, imagine The Witcher if it was a series of missions. So it was more like maybe something like a game from like the late 90s or early 2000s before they did the big open world games, but they had the 3D thing, but it was more like missions, like the original Dark Souls. I guess it's kind of an open world game, but there's not much wandering around. There's always something everything's kind of connected. So, but like maybe something like Witcher 3 would have been better if it was more linear, because what really ruined that game for me was just wandering around. Like, wandering here, you got to go over here. Now I've got to ride my horse over here. And for a bit, it was really atmospheric and cool. And you're like, oh, great, look, I've got this horse and it looks beautiful and the graphics are awesome. And then after a while, you're just like, oh, I've got to get off my horse now and pick up another herb. And then there's a couple of dudes fighting, so I better see what that is because in case it's part of the story. No, it's just a pointless fight. Okay, never mind. Get back on my horse and trek to the other end. And there's nothing really in this big world apart from a few scripted things. So it's like this massive map and then just very little in it. And I think that was at the point where I started kind of checking out from AAA gaming because I just started thinking, right, I see what they're doing here. They just want people to play for longer periods. And I saw it in other games like Shadows of War and the EA games and Ubisoft stuff like you were talking about. My missus really quite likes those games, and she didn't finish Witcher 3. I don't think she finished the more recent Assassin's Creed games as well. I think she kind of got like 40, 50 hours into them and then kind of just was like, bored of this now. And she was only like a third of the way through the game. The playtime on these games is just absolutely insane.
Yeah, I found that I used to be kind of into them, and then I very quickly got over it. And I go, okay, I don't have time for the entire thing. I'm just going to mainline the main story, and you can do that. You need to play the whole thing, or you can just do the main story. So I was just doing that, and then I realized after a little bit of that, I just went, I'm not really interested in this. I don't even have time for that. So, because some of the stories, like I played, I was at Assassin's Creed Origins. I did the main story for that, and then I tried to play Odyssey, and I couldn't even get through it because it just goes on and on and on. And even your main story is something like 50 or 60 hours, and I just went, I can't do this anymore. It's trying to monopolize my time, and I have other things I need to do or I want to do, so I've moved away from them as well.
Well, I think those kind of games are really great. Like, let's say you're unemployed or you're a student, you got loads of time. Like when I first joined Explorminate, I was a student, so I had loads of time, right? Obviously I had to work, and actually my degree was crazy busy, way more so than most degrees I expect. But I still had excess time. And then I love nothing more just to chill out on a weekend or in the evening after I'd been to uni and play something like Distant Worlds for 8 hours in a row. And my missus was quite happy doing her own thing. So like I just had loads of time. And I think those kind of games are great for that kind of person. Like if you are the sort of person who has lots of time, you really want to be immersed in this world, and you like going and doing everything. You've got this kind of desire to get all the achievements, to search every corner of the map. It's kind of for the same reason I don't really play modern RPGs anymore. I kind of gave up on those because I found that I've got this autistic side in me, and it needs to explore every damn corner of the map. I have to pick up everything. And after a while, I've just got like my inventory is just full of crafting crap, and none of it's really any use for anything, or at least it's not obvious so. And I'm just like, I feel like, this is hoarding disorder simulator. So yeah, I'm kind of like moving towards other games. By the way, this is going to lead us into a game that's been released recently, which we were going to talk about, but another game that really does it's not open world, but it's a sort of open universe game where the missions are, but you get to play a mission in a bite-sized way, and you can pick how much you want to do. Is MechWarrior 5, right? Now I know you like this game. I really like this game. I think it was kind of bad on release. When you mod the hell out of it, though, that game's really good fun, right? What do you reckon?
Me and my 69 mods. Actually, I think it's 72 or 73 now. I always find new ones. I'm like, ooh, and then chuck it in, and then try to make it work because it's like a whole mod load order thing. It's a mess.
If it breaks the game.
Yeah, it's basically Skyrim, right? Mod it till it breaks. I think it was also fairly poorly received at launch, or quite mixed. But I didn't jump in until later on because it started on Epic, and then I think it was about a year and a half or 2 years after that I jumped into it, and I was like, oh, this isn't bad. It's the way it's laid out with the mission structure, and you're constantly getting swarmed by enemies. It kind of annoyed me a little bit. I get it's supposed to be arcadey, but you just get like swarms of enemies coming at you, and it makes it a bit crazy. But then I went, I'll have a look at the mods and see what the go is with the mod situation. And I haven't touched the campaign since. I just play the career, and it turns into almost like Pokemon, except you're catching mechs instead of Pokemon. And that was all I did. I just ran around. I do missions. You can pick which missions you want. Like I've changed, because you can mod everything to suit what you want. And that's been my jam. I think I've put like 140 or 150 hours or something into it now, which is a lot for me. No, I love MechWarrior 5. It's so good.
Yeah, I put a lot of hours into that very quickly. It was funny because I was watching Daz Tactic do one of his chat tactic streams, and it was at the end of the year. So Daz was like, I wonder, on the stream, he was like, I wonder what battle modes, what he's been playing. So he went and actually looked. I was watching a replay of it. I wasn't there like on his stream. And MechWarrior 5 came up as one of my most played games of the year. I was like, I don't play that. I wonder what that's about. And and it was kind of embarrassing for me as a strategy gamer, for my most played game. One of them was, I think one of them was like Metal Gear 5 or something, because I'd got back into that briefly, and then the other one was MechWarrior 5, like just modded the hell out of it. But I felt the same way as you. Now that was a game where I spent a lot of time playing it, but even though it is this endless game, I don't think it's actually technically endless, because I think once the time runs out, don't you end it? I don't know. Maybe you can keep going, but the game plays through the sort of MechWarrior timeline up to about 13, up to until the clan stuff happens. Basically, what's that about? 139, is it? I want to say 31.
I think it's way longer than that, isn't it? Like 3015 through to 3062 or something.
It might be 3062. Yeah, it's somewhere around 3150 or something like that was when the clans sort of turn up. But anyway, but that gameplay very much, as you say, it's like Pokemon. You sort of collect these mechs, and if you've got some of the mods where you're building the mechs, even piece by piece, more like the sort of real tabletop game, that game becomes really, really good fun. It's very, very compelling, kind of long-term gameplay. It's still not like super dense gameplay necessarily until you actually get into a mission. And even then, there can be a lot of like walking around, waiting, like trying to move to objectives. But I think I can forgive simulation type games like that a little bit of waiting, because they are supposed to be immersive. You are in your big mech. It was a very cool game for me to play with my HOTAS. I think if they did a VR version, or if there's a working VR mod of that game, that would be really damn good.
There is actually a working VR mod. I haven't tried it because my VR headset has been boxed up for about the past 2 or 3 years. When we moved to the house we're currently in, I thought about taking it out, and then I realized that there's roof beams that aren't that high above my desk. So I figure if I try to play VR with it, I'm just going to bash my head on the beam. So I just was like, you know what? I'm just not going to take it out. I'm not going to tempt fate. We'll leave it there.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, there is a mod, and I've found with the mods I can do all sorts of things too. Like, you can add in new mechs. I've got a lore-friendly mech collection that adds in a whole bunch of different mechs, but it will spawn them at lore accurate times.
Yeah.
So if you've got a mech that doesn't come out until 3042 or whatever, like it will come out at that time on the timeline. And there's a lot of like gameplay, quality of life things. I've got a mod that changes the music back to MechWarrior 2 and then introduces your like battle chatter. Someone's recorded a bunch of lines, or they've put a bunch of audio from actual army operations or something like that, and then they've put that in. So it sounds like background chatter while you're going through the mission. So there's a lot of really, really cool like quality of life, immersion, like extra mechs you can get and that kind of thing that take it from being, I'd say, decent to really good.
So we've just had the release of MechWarrior 5 Clans, which is, as you would expect, it's a clan-focused... It's not a DLC, though. It's a new game, right? It's a standalone game, even though it's still called MechWarrior 5, which is confusing as hell. But then the MechWarrior games have had this kind of naming convention where, they would release a new game and it'd be like MechWarrior 2 Mercenaries. It's not the same game as MechWarrior 2. So, yeah, what's that one like? So I haven't bought it yet. I haven't really got time to play it, and I'm interested to hear what you've got to say about it.
So I've only played a little of it at the moment because I know they're still patching it quite heavily, so I'm waiting for a few of the bigger patches to come out. But I have played a bit of it. It is its own game. It's not a DLC, which still confuses people. But I kind of get that. It is an unusual naming convention compared to how a lot of games do it. It's not I don't know what you call it, like procedurally generated random mission kind of game like Mercenaries. It's very much a more linear kind of game, like story-driven game. And it's, as the name says, it's the clan invasion, and you're playing as the Clan Smoke Jaguar. So that's really cool. And I've been quite enjoying it, the little I have played of it so far, because even if you don't really know the clan stuff, it does a really good job of explaining what's going on, because it starts you off as there's a group of pilots. They're trying to join up with the clan, like get their own star before they deploy and that kind of thing. So you get to go in, you get to do your training missions with your star, and then you have to do your graduation, where with the clans to graduate, you have to defeat 3 other pilots in battle by yourself. So it goes, oh, okay, you're going to go and do your final trial now. And you're like, okay. And then you walk out and it goes, kill 3 mechs. And then like one of them comes out and starts firing at you. And you're like, oh, holy crap. And it's quite difficult. I did get it done, but yeah, I was pretty heavily damaged. And then they have I think it's a Comstar ship, enters Clan Jaguar space, and then they all freak out because they've just realized that they think they've been discovered by the Inner Sphere. And then that's when the whole war starts, because they go, well, they know we're here now. We have to invade them and fight them and that kind of thing. And then the story all kicks off. So, yeah, no, it's really cool. And I'm okay with the more linear stories thing. Like, I don't need a game to take up 1 million hours, as we were talking about before. So I'm really liking getting back to these games that only have, like, 15 hours, 20 hours, that kind of thing. It's cool. The clan mechs control a bit different to MechWarrior 5, Mercenaries. Like, they're faster and they have harder hitting weaponry. So it sort of feels like when you're doing your training missions against the Inner Sphere mechs, you're just destroying them far quicker than you would have playing Mercenaries. So that's pretty cool. Yeah, so controls a bit different, but it's, it's more accurate as well, because the mechs aren't really built for frontline combat. They're more like dueling sort of mechs. So yeah, it's a little different, but it's really good. I'd say, like, as a base game, it's launched a fair bit better than Mercenaries did. Like, they've obviously learned quite a few things from Mercenaries. So yeah, no, it's been really good.
Did you say that it doesn't really have like a sandbox mode then? Is it more just linear missions, one after the other?
Yeah, I don't know if they're going to introduce one later on. There's been a ton of people asking about it, but at the moment, as far as I'm aware, there is no sandboxy mode.
Okay, that's kind of interesting, man. Yeah, I'm interested in this. I've never really clicked with the clan stuff, to be honest, and part of the reason is because just when I'm playing like tabletop BattleTech, and I play with MegaMech, okay, so I thought that was really, really, really beautifully balanced. Now, I know people are going to go be like, what do you mean BattleTech's balanced? There's all sorts of crappy mechs in it. I mean, in the sense of the game mechanics are really, really nicely balanced, and it's got lots of natural asymmetry in the sense that, yes, some of the mechs are better, some aren't so good. The clans thing, I always felt that was... It was almost like really advanced stuff for players who'd kind of exhausted the base game content of BattleTech. And so, they put in these ridiculously strong mechs, that their clans have. They're way more powerful. They, like you say, they play quite differently. Sometimes they can be a little bit squishy, but they are just hit really, really hard and they're super fast. And yeah, they got this whole star thing and elementals and all that. And it just kind of felt like it was just really overcomplicating what I thought was already a really, really beautiful system with the the sort of inner sphere stuff. So I kind of avoided it, but maybe I should check it out because it does sound pretty cool. So recently we've had a really big strategy game release, and it's one that I've been excited about for absolutely ages, ever since it was announced, really, which is ZEPHON by Proxy Studios. It is a follow-up. I guess it's the third game that Proxy have done, I think. It's certainly the third game, based on this kind of game engine. First one being Pandora First Contact. The second one was Warhammer 40k Gladius Relics of War, which Explorminate actually voted as its game of the year when it was released. That was well voted in my opinion because it is an excellent game. Even the base game without any DLC, that game is absolutely fantastic. And ZEPHON has now come out. It was actually released yesterday at the time of recording. And so I avoided all the demos, by the way. I did not play any of the demos. I was so excited about ZEPHON that I did not want to spoil it by playing beta mode, beta versions, because I'm kind of done with beta testing. I've got to be honest with you. I'm absolutely happy to do it when I'm at work and stuff, like testing out kind of unfinished games, because I really enjoy that. I really enjoy the work process of it, but I don't want to do it on my downtime, particularly with a game that's kind of like, I kind of found this with Distant Worlds 2. I've sort of, because I beta tested that and saw it when it was kind of janky and, wasn't working very well. It's really hard for me to get back into that game. So I've got into ZEPHON blind. I'm really, really curious to hear what you think of ZEPHON so far. What's your experience with the game so far, Shaun?
So I've played, I think, about 2 or 3 of the earlier builds before the game launched. And I remember playing, I think it was build 1 or build 2. It was one of the really early ones. I was thinking, this is cool, but this is basically Gladius. And I think a lot of people got that impression from it because they hadn't implemented some of the mechanics like the diplomacy or anything yet. It was basically you've got, I think, 2 players, small map, and all you could do was basically what you could do in Gladius. You just build your base, go to war, all that kind of thing. So I thought, okay, this is the same. And then you come in later on where they've actually started adding in all the other mechanics. And then I go, oh, this is a bit different. And even then, the diplomacy was quite basic. It was sort of more like, if you're familiar with Northgard, it was very, very basic like that. You would talk to the NPC faction. You could trade with them to get them on your side, which is how it works in Northgard. Like you don't really have actual diplomacy. You just give them food and stuff until they side with you. And it was like that. And I went, okay, well, this is sort of the start of it. And then they expanded out the diplomacy system, but it was pretty rough. Like I know there was a whole thing that I was complaining about in one of the builds, how they were kind of a bit schizo. Like they just randomly changed sides for no reason. And it turned out that they were just on sort of a hair trigger with reputation, where if you lost a few units, suddenly they'd go, oh, he's weak now, and then they'd just flip and they'd go to war with you. It was really jarring. Yeah, so I've sort of seen how it's gradually turned into the release version. But I think as I got further along playing the newer builds, it just got me more keen for the game because I just went, okay, they're doing something really interesting here. Yeah, and then I've put in about only a few hours since it launched last night, and it's been pretty much what I thought it was going to be. Like it's very similar to Gladius in a lot of ways, but it stands on its own as well with the new systems and mechanics and the upgraded engine, the upgraded UI. Like it's sort of like Gladius, but then on steroids and with new stuff added in, which doesn't really make sense, but that's sort of how I see it.
No, that does make sense. I can elaborate a little bit. I think so. I straight away jumped into doing a live stream, and I actually ended up playing it for 6 hours straight. And I've had this sneaking suspicion that Proxy Studios they did a really good thing by stripping out diplomacy and kind of a lot of the 4X stuff from Pandora. They actually made it a better game. Now, I didn't play Pandora a whole lot, I've got to be honest, but I played it enough to get the gist. And it was kind of like an Alpha Centauri light game, without the... But it was kind of trying to do something like that, I guess, but without these super, like heavy 4X elements and much more war-focused. Very good war system. Gladius really lent into that, and it stripped out the diplomacy, so, everybody is just fighting against one another. And that that really focused the game on combat. And so it's, I don't like to argue too much about genres because I think it's kind of a pointless dead-end aesthetics argument that kind of just leads into people just talking about opinions. But it was dubious calling it a 4X. I think it was very close to a 4X. It's got base building, produce units, and you go out and take territory, and there's resource management. But I try not to go on Reddit because I just think it's so toxic. And like, you put a post up on Reddit, and you'll say, "Hey, does anybody know what time the bus is?" And they'll be like, "Why do you want to know about buses? Why don't you have a car? Like, what the hell's wrong with you, man?" And that's how every time I go on Reddit, it's like that. So I kind of avoid it. But I was talking on Reddit, right, and I was saying Gladius is like a turn-based RTS game, and let me explain why. And people are like, "What do you mean? It's not like turn-based. Like, isn't that a contradiction in terms? Like real-time strategy? How can it be real-time? It's turn-based." It's like, no, you're not listening. It is like turn-based StarCraft. You have a base. You start with one base. You build the base and send out units to explore and to kill stuff. And then you find your enemies, and then you basically use the resources that you're bringing back on the map in order to make your base bigger. Now in this, you build more bases, and then you crush your enemies. It's turn-based StarCraft. It's a turn-based RTS style game. Don't get distracted with the genre name. RTS is not accurate anyway. It should be real-time tactics. There's no strategy in RTS really. So, and I think if you understand Gladius as a turn-based real-time, like a turn-based version of a real-time tactics game like Dune 2, or Command and Conquer or StarCraft, then it makes a lot more sense. Stripping out the diplomacy and stuff really, really made that game very, very good, because you weren't able to cheese the AI. You had to pick your battles. The way that you kind of avoided being in too many wars was by not going too close to the enemy, because the way the AI worked was that it kind of ignores you until it finds you. And when it finds you, it will kind of zone in on you like the Terminator and try to destroy you. Now, ZEPHON, I was very, very skeptical that they could reintroduce, because it's clear, like I was hearing so many people say, this is basically Gladius. Okay, it is Gladius, but with more stuff added. That sounded like a bad formula to me, because I was like, okay, so they made a game good by taking stuff out of it, and now they've re-added it. Okay, they need to really, really be careful, because adding diplomacy into a game that is so war-focused, in any game design, in my opinion, for a game to be a good game design, to be elegant, you need to be encouraging the player to engage with the best parts of the game, right? So if you think about something like, let's talk about Star Sector. Star Sector's kind of got this sort of trade, like Mountain Blade style trading in space kind of game, but actually it's not like Mountain Blade, because you can't just make money by trading. It's not profitable. You will lose money if you trade normally. You have to do it through the black market, and that's risky. And the reason is because when you get caught trading on the black market, it engages you in combat. Okay, so every game mechanic in Star Sector is pushing you towards combat, and stuff that isn't combat is risky, and that's the whole point. And I really like that. It's super clever game design, and it's the same with as I felt with Gladius. So by adding diplomacy and this other excessive resource management, having a market that you can buy and trade resources with, I was like, how does this help the best bit of this game, which is this excellent tactical combat, played out over this map with terrain and these wonderful, this kind of like Panzer Corps style gameplay with all these different combat units that you've got and heavily customizable with great tech tree. How does that help? And I'm pleased to say they've actually made it work. I haven't fully tested it yet. Like, I've played about 10 hours so far since it was released. And yeah, I think that ZEPHON have really thought about how introducing diplomacy with multiple factions into a game like Gladius is going to work. And they've seemed to have thought about at least the main potential pitfalls there are, like cheesing the AI. The way that the game works is you've got these two main factions, and you've got ZEPHON versus this alien race. I forget what they're called now. And they're the main factions, and you and the other players are kind of like sidelined. Okay, you're the small guys in this kind of big war. And so eventually you kind of either have to pick a side or you have to make a go at it alone. So you have to engage with the diplomacy. So not only does it like, just like Gladius forced you into the combat and to deal with this wonderful tactical combat system they created, but ZEPHON also forces you to engage with the diplomacy. And if you don't, you're going to get stomped, because you're going to get everyone team up on you. So you have to play this game. And fortunately, the diplomacy game is actually really fun. That's my initial impressions anyway. I went in trying to trash it, and I didn't trash it. I couldn't find anything to really trash, at least in the short term. Like, what are your impressions of it, Shaun?
With regards to the diplomacy, I think it's come a really long way, because it used to be like, pretty simple, and really bugged me. It would get in the way a lot because of all the crazy like diplomacy changes on a whim. You'd be constantly getting spammed with phone calls, and they'd be like, "Hi, I like you. Do you want to be friends? Hey, let's be an ally. Never mind, I hate you now. Let's go to war." And it was just that over and over and over again. Yeah, like real bipolar kind of thing. Yeah, it was crazy. So now I think it's really good. It doesn't get in the way very much, and It's something I didn't really notice because I watched you stream it yesterday, and you were talking about this with the you're not the main player, you're just one of them. And then I only noticed it last night because I paired up with the Anchorite because there's the Anchorite below my base, and then ZEPHON's off to the left, and both of them have prevented me from expanding. And I'm like, I need to go one way or the other. So I ended up I ran into some units from ZEPHON and started fighting ZEPHON. And all of a sudden the Anchorite's like, oh, you're fighting ZEPHON. I like you. Let's be friends. And then they allied with me, and I went, oh, sweet. Well, that's just opened up the whole bottom of the map because now I don't have to worry so much about them because we went all the way to being allied just because I was at war with ZEPHON. And then that opens up a whole other diplomacy game where they've got friends and they go, oh, hi, have you met the fallen soldier or something like that, or the honorable aristocrat? Like it starts opening up these other factions because they're all interconnected. And then you find yourself wheeling and dealing a little bit, and you end up sort of picking a side. And then with the Anchorite, I noticed the Anchorite didn't just have the one base like a smaller player would. It actually had 3 or 4 of them over the map and had a lot of military power. And that was why it wouldn't ally with me in the first place, because my military wasn't very strong. And I was like, oh, I can see why now. These guys own like a third of the map. It's really cool. Like it starts off, you're just expanding. You might talk to one person, make contact with one faction, and then it rapidly expands out, and you realize, oh, I'm part of a larger landscape sort of thing here. And then you pick a side, and then you cement your alliances, and then you're leading into the end game where you've got to finally maybe take down ZEPHON or whatever happens in the end game there. And then and that's something I'm really enjoying because I don't usually engage too much with diplomacy systems. Like I find they're often not done very well. Like I remember playing June Spice Wars, and the diplomacy in that kind of bugs the crap out of me because someone pops up, they go, hey, do you want to trade? And they go, okay, let's talk about it. And they say, all right, give me everything you own and I will give you 800 spice or something like that. And I go, well, of course I'm not going to do that. That's a terrible trade. So a lot of that stuff, it's implemented kind of haphazardly, but this is done really well. Like it's making sensible decisions. It's giving you reasonable demands, and it really makes me want to engage with it because I go, it all makes sense and it fits in the world. And I really appreciate that.
So that is exactly what I'm thinking, right? They've created a diplomacy system that makes you want to engage with it. So you touched on this. What are the aliens called again, Shaun? Sorry.
The Anchorite.
The Anchorite. Yeah, okay. So you've got this war between ZEPHON and the Anchorite. And the fact is, you can't be friends with both. That is what makes the diplomacy work. Okay, that is, I think, at least I think, from the few hours I've played so far, that is the cornerstone of how it works. Now, one of the things that Galactic Civilizations 4 does really well with its diplomacy, even though it looks like a generic diplomacy system, but where Stardock have really nailed it is that they've tied diplomatic decisions into other game mechanics. So, for example, if you trade with neighboring civilizations, the longer you trade with them and the more you trade is worth, the more of a diplomatic bonus you get. And so this is really powerful stuff because it means that you have interesting decisions to make. It's like, okay, those guys have got something I want and they're being friendly with me and we're both making a shit ton of credits because we're trading. But I really want what they've got. I need their worlds. It makes really compelling gameplay. And that's why Galciv's got a very, very good diplomacy system, even though on the surface it kind of looks like the sort of same one you normally get. It's the attendant mechanics and the way that they are woven into diplomacy, with the diplomacy kind of at the core of the gameplay, very much like Master of Orion, the original. That's why it's so good, right? And I feel that they're getting there with ZEPHON as well. The diplomacy feels a little bit twitchy in the sense that it could be quite easy just to give them a big bribe of resources and suddenly they'll just like you more. So I don't know how easy it is to cheese, but this whole idea that, you got ZEPHON and you got the Anchorite, and by pleasing one, you'll piss off the other. That is the natural balancing force. We've seen this kind of like asymmetric game design when it comes to, large, powerful forces that you're kind of fighting against before. There's a couple of games that have done it before. Again, you've got Stardock's Sorcerer King, which is a game where you've got this kind of like evil overlord who's ruled the world, and you are one of 4 small factions that he's keeping in check. You have to kind of work together to sneakily get more and more powerful, because if he notices you get too powerful too quickly, he will come and crush you like a bug. That's a really, really cool game idea. Now, people argue over whether the execution of it is good or not. Like our friend Lucid doesn't like that game very much at all. He says it sucks. Whereas I thought that Sorcerer King was okay. I thought it was a pretty cool game. It's a very, very unique idea. ZEPHON's got this very similar idea where you've got these two big forces fighting each other, and they're kind of recruiting you and the other sort of AI players, or the other if you're a multiplayer, the other players, they're kind of recruiting you into their war, right? And you'll often find, like I found in my very first game, I was at peace with everybody at one point. I was just like, okay, I don't like this. This is a war-focused 4X. I do not want to be sitting around, singing Kumbaya, holding hands with everybody. I want to be playing war. So this game should not be allowing me to be friends with everyone. And then this event came up. Yeah, where I paid some resources to get some reconnaissance or something, and it was like, oh right, it's all gone wrong, and now your allies hate you. And all of a sudden, I was at war with everybody, and I was like, oh god, it really pissed me off. And then, but one of the people in my chat was like, well, you were just complaining that there's no war, and now you've got it. And I was like, that's kind of a good point. So I played it through, and I actually managed to win the battle, and I paid off the other two. So I was in a war with 3 people. And I just thought it was kind of interesting because it didn't let me be friends with everyone. Like I was allied with like 2 factions, and I was basically at peace with everyone for maybe about 4 or 5 turns. And then it threw this janky event at me that just kind of like, now I don't know if that's by accident or whether that's by design. If it's by design, it was baptism of fire. I'm going to tell you. And I think a lot of people will hate that because it will feel very unfair. However, it solved the problem of me being friends with everyone. And I think that as Proxy have actually made it so the game is fun for a bit if you're not fighting, because you've got this, you can actually hoard resources and sell them in the market to get influence. You can then trade influence with other factions in order to get units from them. But you've got this ticking clock, and the end, when the end game comes in, you kind of have to pick a side, right? So it's really interesting. They've obviously thought about the potential problems that can come up with this diplomacy system, and they've built the game around it. And that's what I like to see in games design. I don't want to see diplomacy systems just added on to tick a box to say, yep, 4X game, it's got to have diplomacy, tick, yep, okay, check. We've seen that so much. They might be more or less well implemented, but they still feel like they're tagged on because they're not part of the core gameplay. Whereas with ZEPHON, I really feel like that diplomacy system lies at the core of the game.
Yeah, and it leads into the end game as well, because there'll be a event. Like I've played one game where it was, I think I was kind of siding with the anchorite and the rogue operative somehow. And I got near the end game there, and then all of a sudden it's like, oh, ZEPHON's basically gone mental and he's coming after you or something like that. There was something happened with ZEPHON. Except it was funny because I'd already destroyed ZEPHON, so nothing happened. It just went, oh, you've allied with, because I allied with these 2 people or whatever. We destroyed ZEPHON right before the end game. And then it goes, oh, wait a minute, ZEPHON's already gone. Okay, you win. And that was it. So I think I kind of broke it there. So I'm interested to find out whether that's still possible to do. Like that was in an earlier build, so it could be fixed for all I know. It's just, I've seen it's come a long way with these iterations, and it may still have a little bit to go. There might still be a bit of jank, but it's come a very, very long way in about not that much time, like 8 or 9 months kind of thing. So I'm very keen to see what else they can do with it, because it seems like now they've really nailed it down. And like the rest of it is, well, we already know their combat system's fine. Like Gladius's combat stellar, and this is the same. It's a like beefed up audio, and it's the combat maybe slightly improved over Gladius. So they've upgraded the UI. Everything's got voiceover and visual improvements. So the rest of the game, I'm not going to say it's definitely not like a clone or even maybe just like a spiritual successor kind of thing to Gladius. The rest of it, it's stuff that you sort of had in Gladius, but it's better. And like the diplomacy, I think, is probably the only major new thing that came with it. But the rest of it is as good as it's always been. So overall, I think it's a really good package.
Here's the question, though. Would you still go back and play Gladius having played ZEPHON? Because I think that the mark of whether the game is worth buying if you've already got Gladius is if you would go back and play Gladius still. Because otherwise, if you wouldn't, and ZEPHON is very similar, why would you bother buying the new game if it's that similar? I don't know yet, and I need to play for longer, so I'm a little bit reluctant to make a value judgment on it. But my initial impressions after 10 hours are, I think the diplomacy really shakes the game up in a big way. And so the way that you don't know whether someone's going to be friendly with you or not at the start of the game, and it's kind of more difficult to get people to like you, the more they hate you, that seems to be clear. So it doesn't seem that easy to cheese your way out of wars. If they're at war with you as a matter of fact, and they don't really want to be, then you can get them into like a peaceful state. And I think that is going to be the thing that really sets it apart from Gladius, because in Gladius there is only war, and it has this very specific way of playing where you've got to you've got to pick your targets, you've got to figure out how to defend yourself against one perhaps whilst you're taking out another, or oh, I'm in a 3-way here, I'm in big trouble, so you have to play in a different way. Whereas ZEPHON has this grand strategy layer now that's backed up with a more interesting resource economy as well, I think. So the 4X elements actually change the strategic side of the game in a big way. Tactically, the game's very similar. I don't see much difference, actually. I feel like it's basically this. It is pretty much the same game. There's just more stuff to do. Now, what you lose in faction diversity, bearing in mind, it's a little bit unfair to compare ZEPHON to Gladius with 15 faction DLCs, whatever it is now. I don't think it's fair to do that, and people are doing that. I've seen people go, oh, this is like Gladius, except it doesn't have half of the factions. And it was just like, well, what do you expect? Like, do you expect Proxy just to do the same work that took them, what, 6 years or 8 years or whatever it is with Gladius, or 7 years? Do you want them to do that for ZEPHON on release? No, of course not, you fools. I've seen so many people say that. And it's like, no, look. And Rob from Explorminate, our buddy, he kind of said this. He goes, I feel that the game, the replayability of this game is going to be somewhat less, I think, than it could be, because really the way that the factions work is, you're all the same faction, and then you have this leader that has different traits that, that kind of like lean towards either, humanity or voice or the cyber stuff. But you can mix and match. It's like Build-A-Bear. It's like Build-A-Bear faction design. And I haven't listened to the podcast, the Explorminate podcast I did recently, but apparently what one of my viewers told me was that the plan is to add more faction stuff into the game via DLC later. So I'll be interested to see what they do add. So far, though, I'm pleased with the amount of content. I think it's kind of got more content in than Gladius actually on release. And Gladius was an amazing game that was finished. One of the reasons why Gladius was so good, by the way, I think, was because it released in a polished state, pretty much. It took a little while maybe to iron out the balance. It was, balance and bugs. It took about 6 months to a year to really, really kind of polish that down and get the game, to where it is. But if you buy Gladius now, without any DLC, the game is fantastic and incredibly well playable, even with just those base 4 factions. And I'm hoping that ZEPHON's going to end up being like that. I just don't know whether I haven't played it long enough yet to be able to tell.
So I think there's a mechanic in ZEPHON called mutators, and I think that's going to somewhat alleviate the replayability issues and also alleviate a couple of the concerns, because I've seen a lot of, I think you just mentioned it then, about how every unit's available to you, and then you can sort of specialize into your specific kind of unit. Like if you have, say, the cyber affinity, if you're playing as a rogue operative, you can pick anything you want, but you're kind of encouraged to pick cyber units because that's what you have the affinity for. And there's a mutator that I've unlocked already, and it's called Who Are You? And basically, when you log in, when you activate that mutator and you go into your next game, you can only pick the units that are assigned to your affinity. So I've looked into, I can't remember what the other ones are off the top of my head, but there's about 15 different mutators, and some of them change the game up quite a lot. Like there was one about, I think it was like if you kill a unit, it completely removes the morale of all units in the area or something like that. Like there'll be things that do major change up to the combat and major mechanical changes in these mutators. So I think it's going to help address replayability as well, because if you can just randomly change the makeup of the game and jump in and muck around with it, like I think that's going to help a lot. But we've seen what Proxy have done with Gladius already, and we know like Gladius was good at launch, and then they've done a really good job of supporting it. Like, okay, yeah, they've brought out a lot of DLCs, and people don't really like the DLCs, but it's not that they don't like the DLCs, just there's a lot of them, and they don't really like paying for 15 different DLCs. But it proves that they do have a good track record of supporting their game, and I've got no reason to think they're not going to do the same with ZEPHON. So I'm very much looking forward to see what they can do with it. I know one thing that we're talking about is bringing out more neutral units, because at the moment they're all kind of neutral forms of existing faction units. So I remember seeing something where they said they wanted to do more with that, for one thing. So there's so much they can do with this, and it's their own IP. They own it. They're not beholden to Slytherin or Games Workshop anymore. So I'm really keen to see what they can do with it now that they're sort of unleashed, I guess.
Right, so ZEPHON is looking really, really damn good, isn't it, man? And I think that if we can, like you've said, man, if Proxy can continue with the same kind of trajectory, it is going to be really, really exciting to see where they go with it. You know how I was talking about the gameplay density thing? One thing I love about that, as well as Gladius, is that you've got this kind of game at the start where, you have your first city and you've got to make some real tough choices over what research you want to go for, depending on the resources you have around you. And then you've got this game of clearing the neutrals. And in Gladius, it was hard. But in ZEPHON, man, those things work together. They didn't used to work together because there were different factions in the neutrals. Whereas in this one, they just all work together. So it's almost like fighting a war right at the start of the game. And you've got to be really careful with how you expand. I love this. It's just such excellent gameplay to be right from the start of the game, just thrown into a good tactical combat system. And it never lets up. It doesn't let up all game. It's just constant tactical combat. I've seen some people on Steam complain about it, saying it's too much, but it's not. This is what I mean. It's a war focused 4X. It's turn-based StarCraft, and if you can get that into your head, you're going to have a blast with it because it just never lets up on the fun. It's fun right from the start, right to the finish, and it's just I think they've knocked it out of the park. One other thing I want to say, Shaun, is they are such a small company. If you run the credits, you see how few people have worked on this game. It's absolutely mind-boggling to me that they've managed to create such an amazing game. Now, sure, when they were under Matrix Slytherin, they may have had more staff. I don't know. I don't really remember. You'd have to go and have a look at the Gladius, the Gladius credits. But so it might be that they've trimmed down or something, and they did a lot of the bulk of the engine work, in the past, and they've not got as many people now. I don't know how that's worked, but still, got to give them credit for such a small team just really nailing it, man. I think, like I said, I went in wanting to trash it a little bit because I was really concerned at what I saw as a real kind of violation of Gladius's fundamental design principle of forcing you into warfare, and that diplomacy would take you away from that, but it really has not. All it's done is given it a much more interesting strategic layer, and you're still fighting constantly. It's so good, man.
Yeah, no, I really like it. And I wonder if the reason that they can do this with a smaller team is because we've seen this with other studios like Larina Studios, Owlcat Studios, that kind of thing. They tend to specialize instead of trying to do bits of, they'll do like one type of game, they'll do a different type of game, and they'll move into all these different IPs and that kind of thing. I think they've started off with Pandora and they've iterated on it. They've figured out what works and what doesn't, and then they've refined it. And this is the product of that whole process over, what are we talking, like 10, 15 years, something like that. So they've got all that experience behind them, and I imagine that's probably what's helped them make ZEPHON what it is now.
So assuming that this game actually turns out as good as I think it is, because, there is the chance, Shaun, that, I play it for not, for 40 hours instead of 10, which is about my limit. I think once you've played for 40 hours, you should have a good idea of whether a 4X game's good or not. It should have shown its flaws in that time. And Gladius is a relatively short-paced 4X compared to longer games like Galciv or like, Civilization even, or, the Master of Orion-like games. I think it's a little bit shorter paced than that. If it delivers on its promises and there's no glaring weaknesses, the diplomacy doesn't turn out to be super easy to cheese, that kind of stuff, I think 4X developers are going to have to look at that game and go, right, this is what we need to be doing, focused. We got to focus on one element of the gameplay that is really, really fun, and then lean into that to make everything built around that one thing. And it doesn't mean that you can't do non-combat stuff in a combat-focused game, but it's got to serve the purpose of what the game is about. And Proxy have just added this amazing strategic layer to the game, which Gladius didn't have. So yeah, I'm really, really excited to see where they can go with that. It's looking like a fantastic game, and I'm really excited to be playing it more. Okay, so yeah, we were going to talk a little bit about Manor Lords. Apparently that's had some updates, and I've not played that game since launch. How are you finding it, Shaun? Have you played it recently?
No, I don't own it yet. I was going to wait. I sort of want to wait until it gets closer to 1.0, because that seems like the kind of game where I really want to wait till it's got more meat on it because it sounded really cool when it came out, but then from what I was hearing about it, it sort of seemed like the kind of game I'd be better off waiting until it was done. It seemed very incomplete. Things weren't quite working properly, which I don't really know for sure, but because I don't own it, but it sort of just gave me that impression. So I will definitely get it when it's closer to 1.0.
So I don't normally really care much about city builder games. I find them too slow, and the fun in them is often. I think you've got to have some sense of delayed gratification when you're playing a city builder game, particularly if they're complex. And Manor Lords is pretty complex. However, I found that game really fun, and it felt like it was fun right from the start of the game. So I don't know. I haven't actually looked at the news, so to see what what new stuff is coming into the game. But I like Manor Lords. I really hope the developer gets to finish it. I don't see why he wouldn't. They must have made a shit ton of money because he sold a lot of copies of that game. That Hooded Hordes must have been smiling seeing those sales come in because I've never seen anything like it for an indie game. It was absolutely wild. The developer must have been an instant millionaire overnight. So very, very pleasing to see somebody who's worked so hard on a game for such a long time do so well. Interesting that in other news, but also related to Hooded Horse, the publisher, I understand that they separated from the developers of Alliance of the Sacred Sons now. Did you hear about this?
Yeah, I've seen a little bit of chatter about it. There's nothing really there to say why, and it all seems quite amicable. So I don't really know what the go is there. I know Alliance of the Sacred Sons has been in development for a really long time, hasn't it?
Yeah, it's been a really long time, and they did a Kickstarter, and then they had the Hooded Horse thing. The developer, I'm trying to remember his name. I talked to him. We interviewed him at Explorminate. I'm sorry if you're listening, mate. I forget your name now. Anyway, he was really nice. He just seems like a really sound guy. And so I like what I've seen of Alliance of the Sacred Sons. It looks really, really good. I'm going to speculate here. I think Hooded Horse took on a lot of stuff all at once, and they seem to have a lot of games that are very slow in development. Like Terra Invicta. How long has that game been out now? In early access. Like 4 years, is it? 3 years? And it's still only at 0.4 version number, which I think is kind of shocking. Honestly, they really, really have dragging the development on that game out. Now, God knows what it is that they're doing with it, but so that they've made money. Obviously, they must have made money selling the game, but I don't think it's sold a lot. Hooded Horse has done well, right? They didn't just have Manor Lords. Manor Lords must have made them a lot of money, I think. But then they also had, I'm speculating, of course, but then they also had Against the Storm, which did really well and is also a really damn good game. Like that and Manor Lords are superb games, and they're real feathers in Hooded Horse's cap. They've also taken on Old World, and Old World's a really good game. I'm not a big fan, just because I don't like the event stuff in it. I find it kind of tiresome to read it, to have to read a novel every 3 turns. But other than that, it's a really good game. So they've got this massive stable of really, really good games. But I do wonder if they've taken on a little bit too much, because it did feel a little bit like Hooded Horse had infinite money. Yeah, I do wonder if perhaps Alliance of the Sacred Sons is just taking too long. But then, just to counter what I'm saying, to push back against my own point, like Terra Invicta has been in development for ages. And what's that other game? Xenonauts. Xenonauts 2 has been in development longer than Alliance of the Sacred Sons, I think. I mean, when it was first sort of announced and they were first working on it, it must have been 2010, I think. 2012. It's like it's over a decade. It's like a long time ago. So yeah, they've seemed to have a lot of games that are just really slow burners. And I just hope that it's not I'm just guessing again, but I hope it's not that Hooded Horse are sort of like looking at their finances and going, oh, actually, maybe we need to trim down a little bit. It also could be just maybe they had creative differences over.
Yeah, I don't know. They've always given the impression that they're just doing fine. Like, there's nothing really to worry about. Well, we don't know what's going on behind the scenes. Could be anything. But yeah, I really can't think of what the problem could be. Like, that's the only thing I could think of is, yeah, like you said, the creative differences. But anyway, I think we may find out shortly who Alliance of the Sacred Sons are going over to. I think there was some mention. I don't know if it was that they were looking for a new publisher or they'd found one. So we may see something soon. Speaking of devs splitting off with publishers, Sega's been losing a couple of publishers. So, not publishers, developers. So, not that long ago, Relic split off. They did Company of Heroes, the Old Dawn of War games, that kind of thing. They worked on Age of Empires 4. So, they've split off and they've gone indie. And now Amplitude Studios is going indie as well.
Yeah, that's kind of big news, man. And not entirely surprising to me, actually. Like I've heard, heard on the grapevine for a long time that Amplitude looked to be in trouble, and it's one of those things, right? I want to be a little bit careful what I say, because every time I've ever spoken to anybody from Amplitude, they've always been really nice. Okay, they're super professional, seem like nice people. I just don't really like their games very much. I can't get into any of them. I never got into Endless Legend like everyone else did. I didn't like Endless Space 2 at all. And I just didn't like Humankind either. I was in the beta for that briefly, and I did not like it. I just said, no, I don't want to play this anymore. It sucks. I just don't care about it. So I just don't like Amplitude's games. So when I talk about them, you need to understand that, I am coming from this kind of biased point of view. Maybe it's a good thing. Again, you never know what was going on at Sega and Hooded Horse. Now, okay, so I work for a games developer, and this is not the first games developer I've worked for either. I've worked for one back in the early 2000s as well, and the one I was working for in the early 2000s were working for EA. We were a developer who were putting games out for Electronic Arts, and amongst other people, they did some big games, man, like James Bond. They had James Bond franchise. I worked on a Harry Potter game. I did a Harry Potter Chamber of Secrets GameCube version. So they were really, really big. In fact, we had at Eurocon, we had Europe's biggest motion capture studio in Derby, or where I used to live, where I'm from. So it was like a big publishing house. It had a lot of staff there. It was doing really, really well. And I know how much pressure publishers like EA can put on developers to say, no, don't like it, change it. I literally had it happen to us when we were making Harry Potter. Like the big CEO of one of the big executives at EA in Australia, he played a Harry Potter game, which was pretty good actually, and he was like, "No, it's too hard. Make it easier." So we had to strip out a whole bunch of mechanics that we'd made for it and make it easier, and it was a worse game as a result, unfortunately. So I know that can be a real problem, and it might. So again, with Amplitude, they might have felt actually quite constrained by Sega, because I heard a lot of stuff about Sega, man, with the way that they can be.
Yeah, well, that makes a lot of sense. So we hear about that sort of thing all the time, right? It doesn't really matter. Like, there'll be multiple different publishers, whether it's Ubisoft, EA, Sega, whatever. Like what the publisher wants is often out of sync with what the developer wants to do, and I guess they have to make compromises to, find a middle ground to meet in all the time. So maybe they've just had some, like, the differences they've got now are major enough that they've gone, all right, you know what, we just want to do our own thing again. And it was good of them to let them go and let them do their own thing. Like, I don't know what the circumstances behind it are, but hopefully this will only be a good thing. Now can they free up CA as well, please?
Yeah, maybe. The thing is, right, look, it's an amazing opportunity for a developer to be taken on by a big publisher like that. Now, the problem is that these big publishing studios are beholden to shareholders, and, without getting into this topic too much, but they've also got the political stuff going on right now as well, right? So you've got that double whammy. You've got to take on the politics, unfortunately, and you've also got to, if you want the publisher's money, and you've also got to scrubify your games and make them kind of crap and lame in order to sell as many copies as you can. And that is a real dampener to an artist who's trying to make to make a good game, because good game design is antithetical to what sells, unfortunately. And if anybody's listening doesn't kind of see eye to eye with me on that, I beg you, I urge you to go away and think about it really hard, because it's true. Unfortunately, the things that you have to do to make games sell on a mass appeal level are fundamentally opposed to what makes tight game design, I'm afraid. We've brushed over some of these topics today, I think, a little bit, but I think that while the benefits that you'd get for working for a big company like Sega could be really exciting in a lot of ways, particularly with the amount of funding you get a big studio, you get this massive publishing arm that can, with all the marketing teams and stuff, that's really, really cool and exciting. but you're kind of selling your soul to the devil in certain respects as well, and you got to take the politics stuff. And if you don't, you're gonna get in trouble. And you've also got to put in the scrubby game mechanics. You got to make your game crappy and lame for the first 2 hours because you don't want people refunding the game in that crucial 2 hour refund window. So this is why like Ubisoft games and stuff, they've got these massive long cutscenes for the first like 2-3 hours of the game. They're mostly cutscenes, or they're extended tutorials to ease players in, make sure they don't want any problems. There's yellow paint on everything, like Mac from Worth By points this out all the time. It's like, it's one of them yellow paint games. And you know what I mean? Where you've got this, it tells you where to go by painting stuff yellow. I played, what was it? Dying Light was terrible for that. That could have been a great game, but it had yellow paint all over it. So it tells you exactly where to go. Like it's just, and you have to put all this stuff in. So hopefully both Alliance of the Sacred Sons devs parting amicably with Hooded Horse and Amplitude parting amicably with Sega. Hopefully this is in the best for both studios. I would really like to see Amplitude put out a game that I like. That's what I want to see. Whereas I know that Alliance of the Sacred Sons is going to be good because what I've played of it so far is very compelling. It's very, very interesting as a grand strategy game, and I'm really excited to see what they're going to do with it.
Moving on to other Sega studios, apparently there's been some updates to Total War Warhammer 3. I haven't really been watching too close to these updates, but I can see there's been like some major patches, and there's something about a audio overhaul or something coming. Do you know much about this?
No, not really. I've looked at some. I kind of half watched a video that they put out the other day talking about some of the new stuff that's coming in. So they've got a new DLC coming, right? And it's Khorne and who's it? Khorne, Ogre Kingdoms, and Greenskins, which is good because Ogre Kingdoms really needs some new content. It's probably one of the weaker factions, and I've barely played it because I just don't really find it very fun. Greenskins are one of the best factions to play by far, and they're really good fun. And adding more, it's one of those factions where the more stuff you add, the better it gets. It's the other way around in a lot of games, right? You add more stuff, it kind of like dilutes the gameplay. No, Greenskins are all about adding mad shit. So I want to see more mad shit with Greenskins. So yeah, I like Total War Warhammer. I've not played it for a while. It's kind of big dumb fun as far as strategy games concerned.
Yeah, I like it. I haven't played in a while since they released the Shadows of Doubt, not the one that nobody liked, not the one that nobody liked. The next
Thrones of Decay.
That one, yeah. So I jumped in on that, and I was playing as Elspeth, the new lord that came with it. She is so much fun.
That's a great DLC. That's a really good DLC.
It's awesome. Yeah, and you get to fly around a dragon mount, and she's very artillery focused. So you get like the artillery school, and you can add new traits and stuff to your artillery and your ranged missile units. And it's so much fun. You get into combat, and particularly against something like the Skaven, you can just basically cyberbully the Skaven. Like they'll run at you, and they're getting pummeled with Hellblaster artillery, and then when they finally get in range of your Ironsiders, they just get laid out on the battlefield. It's so much fun. So yeah, no, I will definitely have to jump into that shortly.
There's more Sega news as well. Sega have actually started discontinuing sales of some of their retro games. So there were games that were on the Sega Genesis or Mega Drive, depending on which part of the world you're from, and for Dreamcast as well. And this is kind of interesting because there doesn't seem to be any reason why they would be doing this. It all ties into... There's something else that happened in retro gaming recently, which is there was an attempt to change digital copyright management in the United States so that retro games, old games, games that aren't being sold anymore, can be preserved for future generations, okay? And so the idea is that you would drop the copyright on games that are no longer being sold to allow them to be accessed by academics and people who just want to play them and see what they're like, and so that they're preserved forever. And it actually failed. And the argument against it was one of the arguments against it was that the copyright officers said that they felt, or the court said that they felt that they didn't want these games to be preserved in case people played them. So it was absolutely ridiculous. And I understand that they don't want people, I think they're worried that people are just going to download free games. I was talking to someone today. I was talking to Mark from the Electric Underground on his stream. And I said how I'm a little bit worried that the reason why I think Sega are doing stuff like this and other big companies seem to be closing down, like Nintendo are making it really hard to access their back catalogue of games. They strike down emulation sites wherever they can. They hit emulator companies who are selling emulators or building emulators with massive lawsuits. They're just crushing emulation as much as they can. I think it's because they know their modern games are crap compared to old games, and they are embarrassed. That's what I think. I think they know deep down in their hearts that back in the glory days of the early consoles, late 80s, 90s, up until about 2003, 2005, that games design was in its heyday, and it was really, really exciting and interesting. And the more that we've, games design is progressed in many ways since then, but it's often one step forward and two steps back because of this whole monetization thing. And I do wonder if part of the reason why, we're seeing Sega saying, "Oh, we're not going to be selling, the Mega Drive Classics pack anymore, or the Dreamcast game pack." I think it's not because they're planning to reboot them at any point. That might be it, but I think it's more likely that they just don't want people playing older games. And the reason is because, one, those older games are cheap. They can't really monetize them properly. And, people are emulating them anyway. And therefore, if they're playing those games, they're not playing their new crappy games, right? So that's me putting my tinfoil hat on for a little while. I think it's a bit of a conspiracy, personally. I think they're just kind of embarrassed at how bad games design is these days compared to the old days.
I don't know if it's maybe because the newer games are bad, but it's kind of like they're rehashing their older games, like because they don't really do a lot in the way of new IPs. You get the odd one, like, what was it, Unicorn Overlord was the new one, but a lot of it is like, Luigi's Mansion 6 or Mario whatever, some new spin-off of Mario, or still doing Fire Emblem, but then they did that like soft reboot with Engage, like trying to go back to the old way a little bit, and then apparently it wasn't as popular as the newer stuff. So I wonder if it's maybe they're just resistant to change, and like they're not running out of ideas, but they're sort of rehashing the same thing over and over again. And then we've seen they're even going after developers like Power World. They're suing the pants off them at the moment because, what is it? Pocket Pair is the developer. So they're suing them really hard at the moment. They're going after them, saying that they're doing patent infringement on like the whole catching Pokemon style mechanic.
Now, let's come back to Power Word in a sec. I think part of the issue is that they're risk averse. Developers are becoming risk averse. What you need to understand that at the moment, and I'm talking to people in general now, is that we are going through a gaming depression, and we've only just seen the tip of the iceberg of the layoffs and how much money the games industry is losing. So typically, what happens is it takes about a year for you to see the financial repercussions of decisions made, in the past. So, for example, this year we're getting a lot of layoffs, and I'm not surprised to hear that Amplitude have been let go. Actually, like I was suspecting they were struggling for a long time because Humankind didn't really do that well, I don't think, and they must have put a lot of money into that. I'm sure they've been pumping shitloads of money into Redacted. So it's kind of one of those things where I kind of expected that. But I think a lot of these publishers now are becoming really risk averse. And that's why you're not seeing new IPs, because it's expensive to market a new IP to the audience. Okay. It's really expensive. Whereas if you say, "Hey guys, remember Silent Hill?" It's people know these names. You don't have to sell it to them again. Hey, let's just do another Tekken game because there's already been 8 of them. So, or whatever. So I think that's part of the issue, that they are really, really damn risk averse at the moment. And they will only, and they want to save money on having to promote new things. They don't want to run the risk of making some new. I mean, look at what happened with Hyenas with CA. They balls that one up in a massive way. They started developing what was 8 years ago was a popular genre, like looter shooter or whatever you call them. Is it a looter shooter? That kind of shit. I don't know. I don't play these kind of games. And they thought, okay, we want some of that. Creative Assembly, here's $200 million on £200 million. Go build a new studio so that we can make this game that's popular right now. When's it going to be ready? I don't know, about 8 years' time. It'll be fine. That's kind of how that went down. And then they ruined it. They marketed it. It was really, try not to get too much into this topic because it's a low-hanging fruit. I know everyone else talks about it, but it was really woke. Nobody liked the look of it. It was this kind of really badly made, really bad-looking, unattractive game with ugly characters, and And that was it. It almost sunk Creative Assembly. I'm surprised that Creative Assembly are still going, because they canned a game that cost them at least £200 million. They built a studio for that game alone. The Creative Assembly had, like, what was it, 900 staff at one point? Like, when I was working at Eurocon, we had like nearly 200, and that was a big damn studio. And we were doing James Bond, Harry Potter, Crash Bandicoot, like all these big games. We were doing all sorts of ports of like big games and big, they were doing their own kind of, like, they did Sphinx as well, Curse of the Mummy, which was like a really good 3D platform game that they made. So they did all sorts of stuff. They did games for the Olympics, and they did it with 200 staff, right? So what the fuck were Creative Assembly doing with nearly 900 people? That's what I heard anyway. I heard they had nearly 900 staff, and it was just some crazy, crazy money that they were being given to make this game, and then bang, it's gone.
Yeah, well, I think for Hyenas, you probably call that a hero shooter, and that's like your Overwatch style game.
That's the one, yes.
That's what they're going for with that. But maybe I don't know. Maybe that whole genre is kind of a bit behind us now, or something. I don't know, because they've got Overwatch 2 out, but it seems like unless it's something that already existed, like an Overwatch or something like that, it just dies. Because same thing happened with Sony. They brought out Concord with Firewalk Studios, and that cost. It was either 200 million or 400 million US dollars. I don't know which one. There were people saying 400, but I haven't seen anything in the way of hard proof for that. But we know it was at least $200 million, and it took 8 years to make. And it was the same thing. Like, came out, people didn't like the art, they didn't like some of the design. And then I heard people talking about this on another podcast, and they actually played it, and they said one of the problems they thought with that game was the way it was designed. And this is something I remember seeing with Heroes of the Storm as well. The way it was designed made it really hard for new players to get into. Like, there was this whole meta game where it was sort of like, instead of just picking one character and then being able to switch out mid-game to whatever, like in Overwatch, you sort of picked a crew of, I think it was 5 characters, and the characters provided buffs to each other, and you'd set them up in a certain order. But there was this whole metagame thing where you had like your crew, and you could change them around, and they'd buff each other and this kind of thing. And that added a layer of complexity to it that apparently turned off a lot of new players. And it was the same kind of thing that happened with Heroes of the Storm, because it's like your League of Legends, but then it had this whole other metagame thing, like, oh, you're trying to power this monster thing so it can go and kill the other team's monster, or you got to go in these crypts at night and then like kill some skeletons and get gold, whatever like that. But again, you had a lot of people that would jump into that game, because I remember playing that since the alpha. You'd have people that would jump in on that game, and they just couldn't figure out what to do. They just think, oh, it's just League of Legends. We just need to go and push the turrets, and we need to kill the base. It's like, no. There's a whole other layer to it. They're just like, yeah, I don't know what that is. I'm just not going to engage with it. So I think it's the same kind of thing there. But yeah, like there's a lot of studios doing stuff like that at the moment.
There are, and I think what developers and publishers really need to start looking at is, will we make more money by trying to trying to dilute our games down so that they are appealing to the mass audiences, as many people as possible? Or should we try to figure out what our target audience is and then make a good game that caters to that target audience? Creative Assembly messed up with Hyenas. They really read the room wrong, and they were reading the room from 8 years ago. It's like they went into the room or they didn't even go in the room. They looked at a picture of the room from 8 years ago and go, oh, that looks like that the audience looks like they'd love a new game, but forgetting that was what the room looked like 8 years ago. I think developers really need to start figuring this out, because it's making games crap trying to make them appeal to everybody. So, for example, with the example that you just gave, overcomplicating a game genre that is aimed at a mass market that doesn't want complex gameplay is a stupid thing to do. And just as stupid as taking a genre like 4X and gradually stripping out all of the cool stuff in it that made it 4X in the first place, which is what we've got now. They're gradually making these games kind of like weaker and more diluted all the time, and it's only the occasional game like ZEPHON that comes out that actually, really pushes the genre forward in some way. Age of Wonders 4 is a really popular game at the moment, and it's sold incredibly well. But for the amount of people that bought that game, there's a really, really few amount of, the proportion of people who bought it compared to who are actually playing it regularly right now is really small. So it was one of those games where it appealed on the surface to a lot of people because it had this, oh, you can make your character look cool and there's all these different builds and stuff. And then you actually play it for more than 20 hours and you realize that the builds are all kind of the same and it doesn't really change the gameplay in a fundamental way. It's just different flavors of damage that you're dealing with your different unit types. It's kind of boring. And like, and I'm going to annoy a lot of people because I know that it's a very, very popular game still. Sorry to everybody out there. I do like Age of Wonders 4. I just don't love it. And I see a lot of problems with it. And the problems are all from, it's got, Age of Wonders 4 has also got this issue where there's a lot of filler gameplay in it. Okay. So they've got like this Pantheon system where they're trying to get you to play over and over again and giving you little rewards if you keep playing the campaigns. But the gameplay for me is not compelling enough for me to stick around and see those extra bits of drip fed content. I want Triumph to give me all the tools right now. I don't want to have to unlock stuff. Give me the tools. And, if the game is good, it will stand up and I will play it for 1,000 hours. Well, not anymore, but, I will play it for hundreds of hours, right, if it's a good game. I don't need this kind of Paradox style, made for the mass market gameplay stuff that they're jamming into these games in order to make them more mass appeal. And it shows with the amount of people who are playing Age of Wonders now compared to the amount of people who bought it, because that game sold like hotcakes, man. And I'm really pleased for Triumph that they did so well. And Paradox, I'm pleased for them. I'm really pleased for them that it sold so well. What I'm concerned at is that the game design paradigms that they're starting to move towards are kind of making the genre crapper. And I don't really want to see that. Now, don't get me wrong. There's some great stuff in Age of Wonders as well. It's still got excellent tactical combat. There's no doubt about it. It's really good fun. But it's just not for me. I can't get into those games anymore because I just feel like I'm wasting my time. And I get like 2 or 3 hours into it. And I'm just like, there's something about this that doesn't work for me. It doesn't engage me like games like Gladius do, or, Dominions, or Conquest of Elysium, or these other games where they're just a little bit more risky with the way that they take their games design. And I think a lot of developers now, they really need to figure out who they're trying to please. Like, are you trying to aim this at as many people as possible? If so, don't make your game over complex. Yeah, don't do that. It's just not going to work. I think that, with Age of Wonders 4, for example, I would be surprised if even 5% of the people who bought the game really got to see any of the Pantheon content in it, for example. I bet they just played it a few times, thought it was cool, left a positive review, and then they went off and played something else, which is, what happens. So, yeah, I don't know. It's an interesting discussion about the way that developers are kind of making games and who they're marketing things at, because as we've seen, at its worst, it can bring down games companies. And it nearly brought Creative Assembly down, man.
Yeah, well, I think on the flip side, it's interesting that we have seen some developers are going back to older styles of game as well. Like, we've got Saber Interactive. They went back and they did Space Marine 2. So, and as I said earlier on, like, it feels like something from the Xbox 360 days, and it's done really well. I think it had something like 450 or 500,000 concurrent players just on Steam.
Wow, that's absolutely crazy numbers, man. I had no idea it had done that well. And it's a good, because I've not played it. I kind of avoided it because I just assumed that it would be something that I probably wouldn't enjoy, but maybe I've missed out because I love Warhammer.
It's a really good game, man. Like, it's very stompy and heavy and loaded to the brim with like machismo. It's really fun, and it's like, if you're a Warhammer nerd, there's all these little bits that they throw in there, and there's like collectibles you can pick up around the map, and it'll be like, what do they call it? Data slates. It'll be like Vox recordings that have been left behind, as like lore pickups and that kind of thing. And the story is something like we haven't seen in a really long time. Like, they're Space Marines, right? Like, they're immortal, like almost demigod kind of things. Like, and it's all about like honor and brotherhood and loyalty and stuff like that. Like, it's just a really cool old school sort of style of storytelling and style of campaign. And then you've got your single player campaign, which I don't think is super long. I think it was only about somewhere between 10 and 15 hours. But the level of quality in it is astounding. Like, I remember there was this one thing I was watching. I think Titus was on a dropship or something, and he's talking, and you can actually see the neck gorge on his armor moving when he speaks. And I remember looking at that, and I'm like, oh wow, they've put like a lot of work into all the animations and the, like, what's there. There's not a lot. It's not this massive 60, 70-hour campaign, but what's there is very high quality. And then so you've got your campaign, and then you've got your cooperative operations mode, which is what they're leading really hard into. And it pairs up really well with the main story because you've got your main squad with Titus, and then that's your main campaign. And then there's also, I think there's another 2 squads that are sort of working around them while they're in the main story, and they interact with them by Vox when they're going through the story. But then when you play the operations mode, you're playing as those other squads, and then that's how it connects up with the main story, and you're doing those side missions that aren't covered in the campaign. And then that's where they've been leaning into that, and then they've been adding in new missions as well that you can go and play with your friends. And then there's a whole meta sort of thing behind it where you can unlock higher tiers of weapons and higher difficulties and things like that, which I'm kind of getting a little over because it's super grindy, but the gameplay is really, really fun. So you've got them, they're going back to that style of game. And then you've got games like, I can't remember what the studio name is, but they're making 6 Days in Fallujah. And that was quite controversial when it first came out. But I played it at launch, and now they've just released this big update with a, what is it called, command and control mode. And
what was that game? Sorry, Shaun. I didn't quite hear you. 6 Days of Delusion, did you say?
6 Days in Fallujah. So it's
6 Days in Fallujah. Thank you. Yeah.
Yeah, so you're playing as like US Marines in Fallujah during the war on Terra. So this update that they've added now, you can actually command a squad of AI-controlled soldiers. And now it takes you all the way back to like the early 2000s when Ubisoft used to make like your Rainbow Sixes and your Ghost Recons, which were squad-based tactical games. So it's interesting, like every now and then there'll be a developer pops up and they just go, oh, what if we just went back and made something that plays like it was from 10 years ago or 20 years ago? And as long as it's good, people look at it and they go, oh, this is awesome. And then they get into it and you end up with a big hit like Space Marine and you get like 500,000 players. Like it's...
See, this is exactly what I'm saying, right? Why don't developers look at what was really good in the past, but you don't just have to remake stuff, and certainly don't remake them with these bland, kind of this homogenized kind of games design that we've got now, where everything. I mean, we were going to talk about this very briefly, but here's the Silent Hill 2 remake that just came out is a perfect example of what I'm talking about, right? I didn't play the original Silent Hill 2, I'm going to admit, but I played Silent Hill 1 and I've watched Silent Hill 2 loads, so I know what I'm talking about with this game, right? This game had a really, really interesting camera system where it wasn't fixed necessarily, but it kind of moved, but it was still done in a cinematic way. So you moved into a certain room and the camera would be from a certain angle, right? And it would change a little bit. It wasn't static like the original Resident Evil games, but that kind of static camera angle, or like slightly moving, but fixed moving camera, if that makes sense, or moving camera, but it wasn't just like over the shoulder like they all are now. That really was cinematic, and it built tension, and it really was quite scary to play. Okay, and what have they gone and done? They've just gone and changed. They've made this remake, and they've watered down the gameplay to make the combat worse somehow, as if you can make Silent Hill combat even worse. But they've added like a load of modern mechanics to try to make it more like fucking Dark Souls. Even though I love Dark Souls, it's one of my favorite games. Not every goddamn game has to have parry systems and dodges and all this kind of stuff. It just doesn't work in every game. If you transplant that out of Dark Souls, it doesn't work without the rest of the game mechanics, right? And yeah, they've given it this this bland over-the-shoulder camera, so there's no more tension because you can just stand by the edge of the door and just move your third-person camera mouse around, or the joystick or whatever, and then you can just look around the corner to see what's there. This is what I mean, right? So get these new modern remakes. Oh, by the way, everyone like IGN and all that, like, oh, fantastic, 10 out of 10, clap, clap, clap. And this is not 10 out of 10 remake stuff. You've just taken a really, really cool original game that had very, very unique, exciting, interesting game mechanics, and you've just turned it into Resident Evil 2 remake. Like, except it's the same as Resident Evil 2 remake, except now it's just got a Silent Hill wrapper on it. It's the same fucking game. This is not a 10 out of 10 game. I'm sorry. This is like a 6 out of 10 game. Congratulations. You've turned an exciting, interesting, unique game into a bland, homogenized kind of mush of modern games design paradigms. And I really hate that. What you're saying about go back and make a game like Silent Hill 2. Go and make a game with fixed camera angles. That would be brave. And it would be fucking cool, because with the modern graphics and stuff, you could really, really make a really spooky game doing that. I mean, or like you say, go back and, like, I can't remember whether you said you liked the first Ghost Recon game or not, but I remember having fond memories of playing the very first Ghost Recon, like the very first one on the PlayStation 2, was it, or something? Like, people loved games like that. Go back and look at what, made that game fun and try to recreate it mechanic by mechanic, instead of thinking that you're somehow, because we're in 2024, that we've come on a long way from from those old days. Oh, we don't do things like the old days. Those are the old days, and new is better, because new is better. Of course it is. Of course new is better. Why would anything from 1999 be better than something in 2004? Why would it? Surely, like Wet Ass Pussy, of course it's better than Mozart, right? Mozart ain't got nothing on Wet Ass Pussy, man.
Nice. When we were talking about the Ubisoft stuff, so I was playing, I played Ghost Recon Advanced Warfighter 1 and 2, played Rainbow Six, I think it was Rainbow Six 3, and then Vegas 1 and 2. I grew up on Ubisoft games, and you'd see that Ubisoft intro, and you knew what you were getting was a banger. Like, those games made Ubisoft. And then they just went, oh, what if we took Rainbow Six and we made it into, like, I mean, people say it's a tactical shooter, but then, like, when it kind of was to begin with, like that multiplayer tactical PvP shooter, but then over time it turned into basically a hero shooter. So they're like, all right, well, what if we took Rainbow Six and we turned it into a hero shooter? And it's like, why don't you just make more of the games that were really, really good? And like Rainbow Six Siege is apparently doing quite well now, but it took them like 9 years to get there. So, and then you've got Ghost Recon. They go, okay, we're going to turn that into basically Far Cry. Or then they tried to make a battle royale for it that got canned because everybody cracked up about it and nobody wanted it. And then I remember I was watching, was a YouTuber, Big Fry. Every now and then I just load up a video while I'm doing something like washing dishes or something like that. And I loaded this up. And I think it was from yesterday or the day before. He was playing Ghost Recon Advanced Warfighter 2. And I remember looking at it because I tried to play this a while ago, and they don't hold up quite as well as I remember. But I remember thinking, like, imagine if the studios today, they made something like that with modern technology, modern graphics, like with the ridiculous amount of resources they can throw at stuff now. This doesn't seem like it'd be that big of a project for them. But it's like, if they went back and they made stuff like this, for starters, they'd regain faith in their player base. But we know that they did well, and we can see that they're doing well now, because every now and then you'll get an indie studio that pops up and they go, oh, what if I just make something like the old Ghost Recon games and people like it? So I really hope that people start taking... We probably won't see it from big publishers, but it'd be really nice if more of these like AA or like bigger indie studios start seeing that. Well, they sort of do anyway, but more of them start getting on board with that and then start going back and making those smaller, more contained games that people used to really like, because the market still seems to be there.
I agree. And I think that bigger developers and publishers are risk averse, but indie developers, I don't know, like obviously these people still need to make money, but often you've got these passion projects that you can do. And I'm talking about smaller developers now. So, often these passion projects, they're often things that people work on at the weekends. You can really afford to take more risks. And like you say, hopefully some of these bigger indie studios that, they're able just to kind of break free of this sort of like modernization paradigm we're going through, where everything's got to kind of be bland and, the same mechanics, the same game UI, the same kind of graphics. It's all sort of turning into this sort of mush, isn't it? Anyway, Shaun, we should wrap this up because we've gone a little bit over time. Thanks, man. This has been really, really good fun. I really love just chatting about games and, kind of getting stuff off my chest.
Yeah, this is cool, man. Like for those people wouldn't know, but we've been talking about trying to do this for a while, and it's like I really, really wanted to get in because I like doing this stuff. We talk about it and shoot shit and have a bit of back and forth, and I've very much been missing doing that. So, no, it's really good to actually finally be able to sit down and, I guess, just get a start on it.
Yeah, absolutely. I feel the same way, man. I miss doing the podcasts. And like I said, there are some other people who are interested in doing it with us too. So we're going to figure out like what's going to be the best format for that, whether we just bring them all in at the same time or maybe just have one or two extra people on at once. I've found personally that about 4 is about right, I think. But we could maybe we just cycle through some other people and just have them on as regular guests. What we'll do is we'll just try and figure out some time when people are available. Maybe we have one big sort of Christmas podcast where we get everybody on at once. We just have a bit of a party and just chat about games. And maybe some other times it might just be just a couple of us, whoever we can kind of get around. But thanks, Shaun. I really enjoyed that, man. And we'll figure out the logistics. We'll come up with a name for the podcast. And we'll see if people enjoy this one. And if people enjoy it, we'll carry on.
Yeah, awesome. All right. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Anyway, this is Ben and Shaun. We'll catch you later, guys. Take it easy.
Have a good one.